one on the screen right now are all parts of the Z. It's a photographic process that was, or style, I should say, not a process, that was used extensively during the Civil War. The display boards up here have Xerox copies of some of the cartridges each in my collection. One's here, the flag of the 124th as it looked after it came back from the campaign in Virginia in 1864, 1865. And then the original colors that were presented to the 124th when they left the state, including the two small diamond flags. The cartridges each is something that I started collecting many decades ago, along with other Civil War artifacts. But I've stuck with this type of photography because not only does it illustrate what I'm interested in, which is study uniforms, but also because these were much more personal items than the what we call hard images, the tintypes, daguerreotypes, and ambrotypes that you usually see in fancy cases. These things were produced by the dozens sometimes if they wanted it. There's an Ohio gentleman named Lytle. His materials were in the Cincinnati Historical Society. I was going through them. He had a stack of cartridges of himself about that high, as he was distributing them to people all through the places. A friend of mine, who's been dead many years now, Lloyd Ostendorf, who wrote about Abraham Lincoln, said that in the 1940s, when he was going to bookstores and things like that, one bookstore he found had a stack still in stock from the Civil War that deep of Abraham Lincoln photographs. So these things were produced literally in the millions. And if you go on eBay and put in C to D, you'll come up at any point with maybe 2,000 answers to that query, cartridge Z, C to D. What I've done is also bring some examples of actual cartridge Z, two by Newburgh photographers, one by a Poughkeepsie photographer, and the other of Washington's headquarters in Newburgh itself. And the other thing here is a reunion ribbon of the 124th from 1905. I'll have to go to the other side here to start the slide. The one thing I want you to realize is that if you have a question, don't wait until the end. If we're showing something you want to ask about, go ahead and speak up. I won't have to start all over again if you do. So I think I can keep my train of thought. The fellow up on the screen right now is a fellow named George Morton. Now, we know that the 124th and the 56th were the two main regiments that were recruited out of Orange County. But Orange County men went into, as was inferred, other regiments. This fellow, Captain Morton, was in the 5th New York Cavalry, but he had his photograph taken in Newburgh. I see that one's on there. The staircase and banister rail is a prop that was used by a photographer named Lawrence. This was another Morton, Charles Morton, who joined the 14th New York Cavalry. And you notice that there are two types of uniforms here. Of course, this is what I'm interested in. This is a standard company grade officer's uniform coat or frock coat. Single-breasted, 9 buttons down the front, shoulder strapped with 2 bars, that's for captain. And you see he also has a cross saber insignia on his cap. This Morton, however, has a jacket trimmed along the edges. Jackets are very popular with cavalry officers, especially because they didn't have to sit on their coats when they were in the saddle. He has got a slouch hat with cross saber insignia also. All right, I don't know how it's reading it, but there's the Lawrence back mark. On the back of these cartridges, photographers usually put their name, sometimes their address. Lawrence was such a well-known photographer in Newburgh, he didn't feel his address was necessary. This is a cavalry officer named Henry Davis, who actually lived across the river, but had his picture taken in Newburgh, and that's why I included it. He was a colonel of the 2nd New York Cavalry, and eventually became a general of cavalry and served in the Army of the Potomac. He's wearing the frock coat or uniform coat of a field grade officer, double-breasted. And although I won't ask you to count buttons, but notice that there are not a whole lot of buttons in each row. You'll see somebody in a little bit who's got the dinner uniform. These are just examples of soldiers having their pictures taken, sending them to friends, family, what have you. The nice thing about the carte-de-visite was that on the backside you had a whole lot of space that you could write something. And a lot of times you'll find all sorts of things written on the back. Something that you don't find very often is a comment on the picture itself, and someone will say, this is a poor likeness, but it's the best I could do, and things like that. Yeah?
Was the name always on the picture?
No, that's the hard thing. All these guys here, and this group, no names. They didn't write the names on them, and so we don't know who they are. The first two, yes, they had their names written on them. Davis is recognized because he was a general and faces easily recognized. But you put all sorts of personal notes on it, and I hope to do a talk someday on just what you find on some of these carte-de-visites on the backside. Another unit that Newburghers and Orange County people served in was the 7th New York Independent Battery. And that battery actually was part of the 56th New York originally. The 56th New York started out as the 10th Legion because its colonel, who you'll see in a minute, was a congressman from the 10th Congressional District. It's called a Legion because not only did it have companies of infantrymen, it also had an artillery company, a cavalry company, and a rifle company. And it had more companies than the standard size regiment. So when it went to Washington, the federal government said it's too big, and they broke out the cavalry, artillery, and rifles companies and put them elsewhere. The artillery company became the 7th Independent Battery and served by itself as a battery in the Army. You can see this picture was taken in the Brady Studios in New York City. Again, not identified. It came with another man taken at the same time who was of the 7th, so I'm assuming it's also the 7th. Same uniform, same hat, everything. So, and this is a pretty typical example of what you want if you collect photographs. You want something that shows the whole guy, at least in my opinion, and as much of his uniform and advanced equipment, that's good too. So that makes a good collectible. Okay. By the end of the war, and this is what's on the back of the General Davis's carte-de-visite, Lawrence had gotten fancy, and this is what the back mark looks like. Note his name. If you remember the person, it was just Lawrence, Newburgh, no frills, anything around it. Well, this is typical. Helps you date carte-de-visite for one thing. In 1861. Very plain like that, the first one. By 1865, they get a lot fancier. As the years go on, they get even more fancy. One of the things you'll read about, if you read about photography, is that the carte-de-visite was just from the Civil War. Actually, I've seen carte-de-visite from World War I. It was a process that stayed in use all the way up until we start getting the regular, images on photographic paper that we're all familiar with until the digital processes came in. Colonel Van Wyck, congressman who organized the 56th New York, certainly looks less like a soldier than he does a congressman, especially in this. The bow tie, civilian white shirt, lapels turned back to expose it all. This is fairly typical of a casual officer during the Civil War. The uniform coat, or frock coat, was considered to be the dress uniform, and I'll talk more about that later. Van Wyck organized a good regiment that served with the Army of the Potomac during the Peninsula Campaign, and then went down south and served in South and North Carolina. Didn't do the glory battles that the 124th did later. This fellow is a name that I've still seen in Orange County, Van Etten. Solomon Van Etten. He was one of the surgeons of the 56th New York. And again, this is a Brady photograph. Very early in the war, Brady, Washington, simply marked on the back. Van Etten holds his forage cap with a wreath in U.S. on it. He has a gauntlets and probably an overcoat on the table. So again, a nicely posed portrait. This is one of the men that like to have his picture taken, because through the years I've run into dozens of pictures of Van Etten, and I have a nice big tintype of him as well that was found in Fort Jervis. So he's one of the people like Custer who like to have his picture taken and distributed.
Mike?
Yeah.
What kind of overcoat would he have worn? Would it be a gray coat, or is there such a thing?
As an officer, whatever you wanted to buy.
Okay.
That looks like it was in a light blue, so I've got photographs of officers wearing enlisted overcoats, and photographs of officers wearing the regulation dark blue, and then guys in light blue. So that's just officers had the leeway. If they had the money, they buy whatever they want. Now, this is Gabriel Smith, Company C of the 56th New York, and he's a fairly typical enlisted man. He's wearing the New York State 1861 volunteer jacket. I get specific about these things because a lot of reenactors get suckered in by the dealers who sell them things that are not really quite accurate. And the 1861 state jacket had 8 buttons down the front and a breast pocket. You see the handkerchief sticking out of his right there, on one side or the other. That's dependent on the contractor and the jacket. The shield with the Roman numeral X10, of course, stands for Ken's Legion. Since this was the infantry company, the shield was light blue cloth. The cavalry company had yellowish-orange shields. The artillery had red shields, and the rifle company had green shields. And I finally found one of the original jackets with the shield still on it, and it was sent home. And the buttons are not New York State. They're eagle buttons. So you never know exactly what you're going to find on these things, but that's understandable. The eagle, this was the eagle eye, to be truthful, to the 1851 U.S. Giving too much detail. But anyway, if you look closely, I'm not sure that what he doesn't have the eagle buttons too instead of New York State buttons. But everything else about him is fairly regulation. Light blue trousers, forage cap, full gun. And this type jacket was issued to a lot of New York State troops right up until almost the end of the war. I'm trying to remember, I don't think I've seen the 124th New Yorker in it. I know that their initial issue was not this. But anyway, this is a good example of a typical soldier from New York in 1861. Typical company grade officer. In a regiment, for those of you who are not familiar, we're supposed to be 10 companies, 100 men each approximately, giving 1,000 men in the whole regiment. And a company grade officer was a lieutenant or a captain. This is a lieutenant. Actually, he's more famous for what he did after the war than during the war. In fact, he was discharged during the war very early. But after the war, Thomas Pope, and that's him, Lieutenant Thomas Pope, became a local artist of some note. And it's interesting that he met an unfortunate end. He was so engrossed across the river below Poughkeepsie, Cold Spring, I think it was, wasn't it? Do you remember? Anyway, he was paying more attention to the scenery than he was to the train. He got run over by a train. Here's another member of the 56th New York. He's wearing a jacket that is not a New York State jacket. And even after 40 years of trying to find a solution to this, I can't say that I have. It's what I call a veteran volunteer jacket. In 1860, well, late 63, early 64, a lot of the units that had volunteered to serve for 3 years, their enlistments were running out. And so the government said, if you sign up again to serve in the same regiment, and enough men from that regiment agree to all serve together again, we'll make you a veteran volunteer regiment. We'll give you a month's furlough, some extra pay, and the privilege of wearing a veteran's stripe on the sleeve of your uniform. And that's what we have here. Now, a lot of these guys, when they went home for their veterans furlough, actually paid to have special uniforms made up for themselves. And I don't think that's what this is. I think instead the federal government was starting to manufacture jackets because they took less cloth than a coat or even a sack coat, which you see a bit. And so a lot of these guys were wearing these jackets, usually 9-button fronts. But other than the fact that they show up constantly in photographs, and usually a veteran volunteer, I can't tell you too much about it. This one was taken in Beaufort, South Carolina, for the 56th New York War. Oh, and the fellow's name was Smith. I'm forgetting his first name. He's obviously a veteran. Slouch hat, kid gloves. Another guy took a good picture. Now, something that almost every regiment went to war with in '61 was a band. And the 56th New York had a band. Actually, this fellow was one of the regimental bandsmen. Don't ask me what the horn is. I don't recall which type it is. But he's wearing a frock coat, a shield with the Roman numeral 10 on it. Actually, the Roman numeral 10 was cut out, and the dark background is the coat itself. And then he has some special trim on his collar and on his cap as well. Now these regimental bands, some of them were good. Some of them actually hired professional musicians, and they became bandsmen that played for the regiment. But the federal government pretty soon decided that way too expensive for every regiment to have its own band, and they told them, bandsmen, go home, unless you want to serve in a brigade band, so that brigades could have bands. By the end of the war, they started creeping back in, and also you get division bands as well. So you have a lot of bands still in various armies throughout the Union forces. This is a great photograph as far as the quality of it goes. Now, as an example of what a lot of people did, not everybody who was from Orange County, of course, as I said, served in the 56th or the 124th. Some went professional. And this is a fellow named Alan Randall, who was from Newburgh, and he went to the military academy. And he graduated just before the Civil War, served in the U.S. artillery throughout the war, and was very prominent in a skirmish after the Battle of Gettysburg, when they were trying to chase the Confederates back in the South. And this is what's called a vignette photograph. The photographer has what they call dodged out everything except just his face and a little bit of his front. Photography has changed so much. We older folks will remember that when they print the image, what they would do was to actually move something around the edges to keep it from printing, and then you would just get a vignette in the center. And these make great portraits, but they don't help me see what the uniforms are. That's what I'm interested in. So we all know about the 124th. good Civil War artist going today. I'll probably be sued for libel before the consular claims to be a great Civil War artist, in my opinion, a bad artist. Don shows Colonel Ellis on horseback, fellow you'll see in a few minutes with a horn, a bugle. That's Chief Bugler Moses Ross. And it clearly depicts what the regiment was doing. You know, the regimental history, they say that we were too green. We didn't have the sense to dig in and get behind something. We just stood out in the open. It was that stand out in the open that held back Bush Texas Brigade for a long time and kept the Union Army from being completely overrun in Gettysburg. Something that's on here, on my board, on the far board, the center thing in the middle, that is something I've never seen in any other regimental history. It's at Gettysburg, and it shows where every man was supposed to be in the line of battle at this point. And I've never seen that done by any other regiment. That just shows you what 124th thought of their stand at Gettysburg, how important it was to them. Well, anyway, Van Ellis also took a good picture. He was quite a character. I do a regular series of articles in a magazine called Military Images, and the man did just about everything. Traveled the world, came back, served with various forces, came back and organized the 124th. He actually had helped organize the 56th New York, but something happened between him and Van Wyck, and it was falling out, and he went off and formed the 124th later. He's wearing a sack coat, and a lot of officers, almost all officers in the field, would wear the sack coat, which is just a straight, like a sack garment, fastened in the front, very loose, very casual. It's what the enlisted men were given. The sack coat, most of the guys who sell sack coats to reenactors don't make them out of rubber cloth. It really wasn't made out of wool. It was made out of wool flannel. It was very flimsy, a lot flimsier than what most reenactors' sack coats are. Now here's another character. He fought in the Mexican War, served in another regiment before he came to the 124th. This, of course, is Lieutenant Colonel Cummings. I honestly don't know what he's wearing as a medal, but I do know that from his pose and the look on his face, he's not somebody you would want to make mad after. He was, of course, the fellow who took over the regiment after Ellis and the major were killed at Gettysburg. Picture was taken obviously in the field somewhere. He's sitting in what they call a field chair. Don't know exactly what's in the background. I think the long skinny thing is one of the tripod things that held the person's head in place so it didn't weave too much when the picture was taken. But there doesn't seem to be anything holding his head still. I love that picture. Now you say you have Surgeon Thompson's coat. Is it this coat?
Looks like it's me, yeah.
Count the buttons. Count the buttons downstairs. So he's got too many buttons on his coat here. Yeah, he's got 9 buttons on each side.
And I don't remember 9.
9 for the front, and then 7 if it's in a double row. So, probably
I'm
not.
not sure how many.
Yeah, this is early in the war, so we probably early on in the war you find this happening sometimes.
Well, we conserved it. We photographed it quite often. We photographed the conservatory at work. We photographed the whole process,
Right.
and also it's downstairs. Anybody who would like to examine it, I'd be happy to show it to you. The thing with the uniform is, somebody suggested it might be JAR. It's not. It's original. It's original. It's, and we have confirmation it was given to us by the family.
The regiments had surgeons and assistant surgeons. Surgeons were majors. Assistant surgeons were lieutenants. And he's wearing a major oak leaf in his shoulder strap. There are a lot of little details on uniforms, and that's what intrigues me. There's so many little details. He's in an infantry regiment. The infantry officer is supposed to have sky blue or light blue shoulder straps, edged with gold bullion. But he's a staff officer, so he has staff officer's color, which is black. They never wore green. You'll see some people saying that they wore green. They didn't. They wore green sashes. Certainly did. But not green on their shoulder straps. Now this is the adjutant of the regiment, Ramsdell, and again a Brady photograph taken on early. Can point out something else about the uniforms here. He's wearing a jacket, which is fine. As an adjutant, he was mounted. His trousers are dark blue, and if he beats the regulations for uniforms, the stripe is gold and not light blue, because he's a staff officer. Slouch hat has a wreath in U.S. instead of a horn and 124th, because he's a staff officer. So even though he's a regimental staff officer, he dresses like a staff officer for a general would have. And he seems to have a pocket low down, which is kind of interesting. Early on, just as an aside about pockets, early on when percussion caps first started to be used with muskets, they didn't have leather cap box to hold them, so they made a small pocket on their jackets and coats to hold them. By the time of the Civil War, they of course had cap boxes. They got cap boxes right away. But because who's going to be carrying percussion caps on their body? But anyway, you'll find those small pockets in a lot of coats. And the reason is because that's where they put the watches. And rather than have to fool around and get into your watch pocket and pull out your watch, put it on the outside of the coat. Captain Isaac Nichol, one of the heroes in the sense of the 124th, killed the second day. He had his body wedged in rocks in the field that couldn't get the body off when the regiment had to retreat. Again, this is another photograph taken in Newburgh by Lawrence, as I recall. Taken early on, probably. Slight tipping on his face, a little bit of coloration put on his face. And for all intents and purposes, this is your standard infantry company grade officer. It's nice holding sword. And looking at, yeah, he does. He does have a pants strip. Oh, that's the other thing. Trousers. Officers' trousers. Almost everybody who reproduces them makes them the wrong color. If you've ever seen a Marine and he's dressed blues, not dark, trousers are, that's a lot closer to the shade of officer's trousers. I had a discussion just a few minutes ago about figuring out colors in photographs of this type. And the albumin process, and I have no idea why it did not reflect what we would consider to be the degree of lightness in the color. Instead, it shows the amount of light reflected by the cloth. So his trousers, not being made out of the same type of trousers as an enlisted man's kersey, but made out of a broadcloth, or a finer, shinier fabric, so they look almost the same lightness of the enlisted man's color in these photographs. Cavalrymen in the photographs, like Carter's and such, taken by the albumin process, they have yellow trim, that's their branch color, still is branch color today, but it shows up as black because the cloth that they used was so soft, it was not at all shiny, it did not reflect a lot of light. One of the strange effects of that type of photography. All right, Moses Ross, the chief bugler of 124th New York. His chevrons are those of a sergeant major with a star in the center. And that was what was used by principal musicians north and south alike to show their rank. It was equivalent rank to that of a sergeant major, but they weren't a sergeant major, so they put the star in there. That's totally unofficial. It was done all the time, but it shows up in no regulations. Something that reenactors do that's not legitimate is to have ordnance sergeants, chevrons for infantry, cavalry, and artillery. No such thing. That never shows up in the program. Ordnance sergeants, star with 3 stripes shows up, but only as ordnance sergeants, not as cavalry or artillery. There were people who were designated to be ordnance sergeants, but they never got a special insignia. On the other hand, another unofficial insignia that did come out and show up in cavalry regiments and artillery regiments, light artillery regiments, were farriers, the guys who worked with the horses, and they had a horseshoe, and you'll find that in civil photographs. Totally unofficial, never supposedly permitted, but they did it. So anyway, Moses Ross is wearing his sack coat, chevrons, and if you look down at the second button down, he's got the orange blossom ribbon tied to that button, or probably the button. And I know there's a debate going on within the elements of the regiment about what color it was. From what I can see, it was orange. There's another guy. I got this photograph when I lived in Ohio as a college student back in the 1960s. He wrote his name on the back, but at that point there was no real way to find out trace names. There is today, thanks to computerization. But eventually I discovered who he was. That's Wood T. Ogden, from New York. And this picture was taken in Middletown. It was obviously, he was home on leave. This is 1863, because he has 4 bags on top. And when the picture was taken, the 4 bag was light blue, which means it was before they were transferred into the 1st Division of that, first Division. But the photographer or somebody tinted a little bit of red over the top of it to reflect, what happened when they changed their division. The Army Corps, each corps had a symbol. And in this case, 3rd Corps was a lozenge or diamond. 1st Corps was a circle. 2nd Corps was a trefoil or club. And within that, they further broke it down to 1st, 2nd, and 3rd divisions of the Corps. 1st Division insignia was red. 2nd was white. 3rd was blue. And if there was somehow 4th Division, it was green. But you can see here what he's done. They went into the 1st Division, so somebody tinted it red, even though it shows up as light blue underneath. He also has probably NY and 124 on his cap. He wears the enlisted man's uniform coat or frock coat, sergeant stripes, dark blue trousers. A lot of New York troops had dark blue trousers instead of light blue as well. And Wood T. Ogden survived the war, and I have a flyer at home of when he became a pension broker. And he was soliciting veterans to come to him so he could help them get their pensions here in Orange County. This fellow did not survive the war. Him was Benedict, what's his first name? Francis Benedict. This is actually a part of the copy of a tintype. If you had a tintype made, you only got one, because that was both positive and negative. So if you wanted to have reproductions made, the cheapest way was to have it copied by the cartoon photographer, and you could get them.
So would that be a reverse?
Yeah, it's reversed. You see his bayonet scabbard is on the wrong side.
Yeah, and so is his cap pouch.
Yeah, right, everything's
Everything's,
reversed.
yeah.
Cartridge receipts, unless they flipped the negative when they were printing it, always came out as a non-reversed image. The tin types, amber types, and the earlier Gugera types, because they were both positive and negative, were always reversed. Although they did have cameras that had extra lenses in them to correct that, but that was very infrequently. So, but this is a nice one. You can see along the edges, see that oval along the edges that surround it like a halo? That was from the mat that covered the tin type, and it left impressions of itself on the image. And he's also carrying the European import rifle that the regiment was first issued with sort of saber bayonet. Rifles were shorter than muskets or rifle muskets, and so to give the guys the extra reach when they're using the bayonet, they gave sword bayonets on to rifles. That gave them that extra little bit of inches that they needed to match the same size as a rifle musket or musket with a bayonet. One of my gripes at the Gettysburg National Park Museum when it first opened was they didn't know the difference between a rifle musket, a rifle, and a rifle musket. And they should have, but they didn't. So it's one of the nasties I wrote about too. He was killed at Chancellorsville, so he didn't last long. First major action. And he's wearing the overcoat. Enlisted man's overcoat, light blue kersey. It's an infantryman, so the cape only comes to about his elbow, and single-breasted. Cavalry had double-breasted with longer capes. And the reason for that's kind of obvious when you think about it. Infantrymen march. They're standing up. Cavalrymen are sitting on horseback. Their clothing bunches and pulls apart. So you put it double-breasted so that it keeps them from pulling apart and getting wind in. And then the capes were longer on cavalry because they, again, had more to protect. They had also some of the equipment that they had to protect as well. So there are reasons for a lot of things that happen in uniforms. Just have to know what they are. Here's that same veteran's jacket again. It's being worn by a member of the 124th New York in this case. No veteran stripe. And this is Freeman Rossman. He's also got a musician's sword, or NCO sword, I can't really tell. Can't see whether it has the guitar on it. And can't explain why he's wearing it. But there he is, proud as peaches. They weren't imitating Napoleon. They did that, and Napoleon wasn't doing it to be Napoleon. They didn't really have really accessible pockets. And you got to have something to do with your hand when you're standing there, so you stick it somewhere. And that's what they're doing. To Napoleon too, he does that. There were more accessible pockets by the time of the Civil War, but it was still easier to do that. Nice photograph, survived the war. And those who did survive the war came back to Newburgh, up the Hudson from New York City on the Mary Powell. And this is a cartridge copy of a Bard painting of Mary Powell. Now, believe me, if it existed in the 1860s, there's a cartridge of somewhere. And that includes erotica. I have some of that in my collection too. Victorians were not prudes. They just didn't talk about it the way we do. But anyway, to close out, there you have the Mary Powell steaming along the Hudson River. And when the regiment, the 124th, came back to Newburgh, one of the Newburgh papers called them Regiment of Heroes, which of course they were. Are there any questions or such? I actually talked about as long as I want to. I don't like to hear my voice. So, yeah.
Where was photographer Lawrence's studio?
No, I don't know. were down along Water Street in the old Newburgh before it was torn down, or renewal. Most of them were down closer to the water crossing. But Lawrence's never looked up in the director or anything to see where it was.
I have the old Newburgh City Director downstairs, and maybe we'll find out this evening.
Okay. There were a lot of photographers in Newburgh, and they were, most of them pretty good. Yes.
You mentioned the rifle.
Yeah.
How many shots in the rifle?
Well, all of these are basically one shot in muzzle loaders. The difference, the rifle, when the military started using rifles, they made them shorter, probably because shorter than the Kentucky long rifle and all that, so you wouldn't have to ram down the projectile, because it was still just a round ball that had to fit tightly at that point. They made the barrel shorter. Muskets were, rifle might stand this tall, musket maybe this tall, and rifle musket would be about the same size. But all of them were single shot muzzle loaders. None of these regiments got any of the breech-loaders or eventually repeaters. Well, by the end of the war they did have. When the war started in 1861, federal government didn't want any cavalry. They thought they had enough cavalry. They had 6 regiments of cavalry in the regular army. Of course, most of them were in Texas and other like that had to be brought east, but they still didn't think that they needed any cavalry. Then they found out, oh yeah, we do need cavalry, and they asked for cavalry volunteers. So in the summer and fall of 61, they started taking in cavalry. And those guys all had to start out with the Civil War. But the war stopped before they could really start using them that way. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Recognize you for coming this evening. We have a certificate of appreciation to you on behalf of the County of Orange. Thank you so much.
We also got something for him. We got one of our T-shirts. A little later. Third or fourth, first edition.
So sit down, Jeff. Jeff, would you come up? I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions made by the Sons of Union Veterans to Ellis Camp. Gentlemen, thank you for everything you've been doing to promote Orange County history. Would you all join me in applauding them? Is Ryan here? No? No, Ryan. Okay. So,
I can take it up. President.
please come up. On behalf of Orange County, I'd like to thank the 124 state volunteers for all you do to present and preserve and share with our residents of Orange County the history of our county. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. And thank you for those who were down in the camp this evening, this afternoon, and appreciate you all coming out. Thank you.
And there's an envelope for your... Is there anybody that's inside in? Bill?